day 3 of FYB's email course. So far we've looked at a bunch of pros, and we've seen that they execute 5 fundamentals each time they hit a forehand. Today we're going to look at some amateurs and see how they execute the fundamentals. We have Lucien, who got started playing, John, who is a club player, and Kevin, who played in high school and is now just getting back into the game. Before we get started, I want to thank each one of those guys for being our guinea pig, for allowing us to critique their strokes, because hopefully their example will help y'all at home improve your forehand. First up, we have Lucien, who's been playing for a couple months. He's joined a couple leagues. He's really into the game, and he's looking to improve. Now, Lucien's strokes are representative of the strokes I see on public courts all the time. A lot of weekend players have strokes just like Lucien. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of his motion, and the first thing you're going to notice is that Lucien is only holding the racket with his right hand, his hitting arm. So already he's not going to be able to execute fundamental number 1. He has to have both hands on the racket. So to start his motion, he does not pivot. He doesn't really turn his shoulders, but he does take the racket back with his hitting arm, straight back. And remember, it's supposed to be the shoulder turn that starts the racket take back, and not the arm. Now, his shoulders do turn sideways a little bit, but that's because the racket is coming back, his arm's coming back, that's pulling his shoulders back a little bit, as opposed to the shoulders turning and bringing the racket along for the ride. Let's move on to fundamental number 2. And here we have Lucien taking the tennis racket all the way back. Racket's back now. But you'll notice when we look at his feet to start, he's got the weight on both feet as opposed to his outside foot, his right foot. The second thing, his body is still not sideways. It's more or less facing the net. And his non-hitting arm is down by his side. It's not extended out across his body like it should be. Now let's rewind it a little bit and then watch him take the tennis racket back. And what you'll notice is that he kind of takes it back like a pendulum, going back like this. Now, if you remember back to all the pros we watched, none of them have that pendulum back. They have the racket here, somewhere up there, because taking the racket back like a pendulum is going to interfere with 2 more fundamentals later on down the road. So now Lucien's going to swing the contact. Let's begin by looking at his feet. Does he push off his outside leg? Well, yes, he does. But the problem is, because the weight was on both feet, he also pushes off his inside leg. He only wants to be pushing off that outside leg and not both feet. Now let's look at his upper body. Well, he's not really turned. He's a little bit sideways, but there's not too much body rotation during his forward swing. And again, that's because he didn't get completely sideways when he was preparing. Now let's move on to his racket and his arm, and look at how he swings the racket. Well, remember just a short couple seconds ago, I was talking about how Lucien took the racket back like the pendulum. Well, that is going to interfere with his swing up to the tennis ball. All those pros we talked about, they were tracing out a C when they swung forward. Lucien, because he's got that pendulum motion, more like a U. So what Lucien needs to do is take the racket back a little bit higher, and that's going to allow him to drop it down and then swing forward, as opposed to take it back, stop, and then swing and hit the ball. Let's move on to the follow-through. And here we have Lucien at contact. And as he begins his follow-through, let's look at his hitting arm and his racket first. It doesn't really extend out in the direction of the tennis ball, but he is turning his forearm and his wrist over like he has a watch on. So that's good. That's going to allow him to bring his racket across his body and swing motion. We go back to contact. There's also not too much body rotation after he hits the ball. And that's related to what he was doing earlier in the motion. He didn't really turn much to prepare, so he wasn't going to have much rotation into the ball, and he wasn't going to have to slow himself down too much by continuing to rotate after the ball left the swing. Let's move on to the 5th fundamental and see if Lucien is a continuous swing pattern. Let's watch his stroke one more time. Now, at first glance, it may look like he never stops moving the tennis racket, but with that pendulum swing, the racket's going to come back, stop, and then swing forward. So that's another reason you don't want to have that pendulum swing. By taking the racket up a little bit higher, tracing out that C, well then you drop the racket down, swing forward, but it's never stopping. It's a continuous motion. But again, the U, got to stop and then bring it back down. So by taking the racket back the way he does, he is preventing himself from executing the fifth fundamental correctly. Now we're going to do something fun. We're going to split screen Lucien and Tommy Haas. You can see them on the green screen behind me. We're going to compare their strokes side by side, fundamental by fundamental. And we're using Tommy Haas because he has great classic mechanics. He's a fantastic model. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to fade out, and we'll take a look at their respective strokes. To begin, Tommy has got both hands on the tennis racket, but Lucien, of course, does not. And when Tommy pivots and turns his shoulders, that's obviously flawless. Pivots to the outside foot, shoulders turn sideways, racket is coming back because the shoulders are turning sideways, facing the net, but he is taking the racket back with his hitting arm. So the racket's coming back because he's using his arm, not turning his shoulders. Tommy, to complete his preparation, well, he's going to take the racket back. He's going to release and take the racket back with his hitting arm now. That non-hitting arm extends out across his body, about shoulder high, in line with the baseline, and the weight is now loaded up on Tommy's outside leg. Well, Lucien, he takes the racket all the way back with the hitting arm, but the non-hitting arm stays down by his side, doesn't extend it out across his body. He is, of course, facing the net. He's not sideways like Tommy is, and he's got the weight on both feet as opposed to the outside foot, like again Tommy has done. When these guys swing, well, Tommy's going to push off that outside leg. He's going to rotate his body back towards the net, and the racket drops down and swings forward. Lucien, however, he pushes off both feet, does push off the outside leg, but he also pushes off the inside leg. And his body, not too much rotation there, and because he had that pendulum on the backswing, well, he's going to swing forward, but he doesn't trace out that C like Tommy does when he is swinging. From contact to follow through, Tommy extends out in the direction that he's hitting, and he turns his forearm and the wrist over like he has a watch on, trying to see what time it is, and he continues to rotate after he hits. That allows him to slow his body and the racket down smoothly. Lucien, well, he doesn't really extend out in the direction that he's hitting. He does turn his forearm and wrist over like Tommy does, but again, he's lacking that extension into the court, and he doesn't really rotate his upper body too much after he hits. So we've just seen that Lucien has trouble with each of the 5 fundamentals. But that's to be expected because Lucien has just started playing. Now, I don't want to make it sound like we're savaging Lucien's strokes, trying to pile on, because Lucien did a lot of stuff really well that we have not pointed out. His contact point was out in front of his body, which is surprising for someone who just started, and his timing was really good. He was able to rally with him, hit the ball in the center of the strings, which is something I don't see very often for a guy who knows his timing. But the point of this video is to highlight the most common mistakes that people are making